As World War II broke out in Europe, Germany began its exercise of massive westward movement. Germany had not only invaded Poland, but then they were going to move west towards Belgium, the Netherlands, Norway, and yes, France. The Germans were on such a streak that they cooperated with the Italian army to where the Germans would invade France from Western Germany into France, and the Italians would invade southern France. And in doing so, by the summer of 1940, the entirety of France had fallen under Axis control. So France would no longer be an official player in the war. Hold that thought because there's some other things going on. But otherwise, though, in the town of Vichy, in south central France, the Axis powers, most specifically Germany, set up a puppet government controlled by the Germans that would coordinate various different actions in French governmental control, Vichy France, as we call it. So Vichy France would become obviously a part of the Axis cooperative, if that makes sense. And otherwise, many of the various French colonial possessions and territories across the world would now be threatened. So hold that thought here for a second, too. Otherwise, though, the United States, while all of this was going on, adamantly wanted to remain neutral, especially as we had the Neutrality Acts, which built upon our isolationist views at the time. We wanted to rely on ourselves, let Europeans handle their affairs as best as possible. But on the onset of World War II, it was quite obvious that while we were neutral, the vast majority of the American public favored the Allies. They favored Britain and France. We have strong ties with them. Obviously, we were a colonial territory of the British for a number of years. We defeated them in two different wars, but time heals wounds. Definitely, the British were our allies, and we sympathized with them. So while we were neutral, uh, we favored the Allies. Okay? And thus, FDR explored the idea of maybe loosening some of the tenets behind this Neutrality Act that we had promised in the late 1930s. Okay? So, various different things were going on at the time, and of course, FDR had a presidential election in 1940. An unprecedented third term. We'll talk about term limits later on in American history, in a few chapters down the line. FDR was our president during the Depression. New Deal, Second New Deal, other different things. Ran for re-election in 1940 and wins reasonably handily. And because of which, he continues to commit to the idea of neutrality. However, it's pretty hard to remain neutral when, A, our friends the British are really struggling, both militarily and financially. If Britain falls to Germany, there's a massive problem. So while the United States is committed to being neutral, in reality, we want to help them as best as we can without actually committing troops and fighting in the war. So FDR and Congress recognize an opportunity for us to, quote unquote, remain neutral while in fact helping our British allies. And we established something called the Lend-Lease Act, which allows the United States to manufacture weapons like rifles and ammunition and allow the British military to lease them or otherwise return them upon end of the war. So we are taking payment to allow the British military to buy arms from us and return them, if you will. Okay, and at least they're paying us, so to speak, for it. That way, we could have something. Now, the Lend-Lease Act was created not necessarily as an act of war against the Germans. It was enacted so that we could at least appear neutral under the guise of we are going to help the defense and come to the armament defense with American-made weapons for countries that are pivotal to the defense of the United States. It's a very loose interpretation. In other words, hey, Britain's our friend. If they fall, we could be severely threatened. We're going to help them. We're just not going to get involved directly in the war, but we're going to help them. So the Lend-Lease Act was very important in helping the United States lend weapons to Britain without violating the Neutrality Act. And then also, it has an unintended consequence of now drawing Germany's attention to the United States. Even though we were neutral, the German Navy starts sending all kinds of different naval vessels towards the Western Atlantic, even off the coast of the United States, to explore U.S. merchant ships and engage in kind of an unofficial merchant naval war against American merchant ships, because they know that a lot of the stuff that we're sending is going to help the British, whether it's weapons or foodstuffs or anything else along the lines. We're helping the British, though we're not directly in the war. So there's this unofficial naval war that the United States merchant ships are engaged in with various aspects of the German Navy. Things get pretty tedious. Things get pretty precarious, if you will. The United States signs with Britain the Atlantic Charter, which has an aim to establish order, a sense of non-militarism, and self-determination to overcome. Okay, it's not an actual declaration of war or anything, or an actual official partnership. It's basically, hey, we recognize you as being friendly, and we want to promote long-term peace, if you will. Okay. Otherwise, though, we have Germany's attention. They've noticed that we're partnering with the British and trying to help their cause by sending weapons and otherwise. They're trying to stop it. There's no official act of war to this point yet. But don't hold your breath.